Hi, everyone. Welcome back to You Ask, We Answers. I'm so excited to be here with you all on the first of the month. My name is Zoe Bambara. I am the community and youth organizer for Women Engaged. And I'm just happy to be in this space with you all to close out the summer in a very much needed way. Just before we go into organizational updates, I just want to check in with the people who are watching now and people who may be watching in the future. Please take note of how you feel and make sure you're taking care of yourself at this moment, eating, drinking water, whatever you need to do. I'm very excited to start the first month off on a really good note, first day of the month on a very good note. So just going into some organizational updates. We are hiring canvassers. So if you're interested, please send resumes to info@womenengaged.org. And then somebody will get back to you on the next business day, usually, to set up an interview. But we are definitely looking for canvassers for our Get Out the Vote campaign because, of course, this election is extremely important, as if all elections are important. So want to make sure that we have canvassers who are on the grounds doing the work. And of course, speaking of voter registration and getting people registered to vote, you can check and update your voter registration by using the link below or also visiting our website. It's very important to continuously check your voter registration because you never know what happens. Like if you move or get married, you may have been purged from the polls. So please make sure your voter registration is up to date. Because I want to say the last day is like mid-October. I don't know exactly, to be registered to vote in the election in November. So please check your voter registration. And we are also hiring volunteers. So if you could, please visit our website for more information. Um, in case you might want to volunteer with us. And like I said, if you want to canvas as well, you can also check our website and send an email to info@womenengaged.org. So to get into the show, we have, of course, Kai and Michelle, who are going to help in this conversation. So excited to have you guys back on. And we also have Rula, who is the state campaign director of Amplify Georgia. So hi, Rula. How's everyone doing today?
Hi, Zoe. Great to be here.
Awesome. I of course just want to kind of check in with everyone, make sure everybody's good before we get into the show. So how are you, Michelle? How are you, Kai?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired, but thankful it's Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
same. Doing good. Got my water. Staying hydrated.
Awesome. We love to see it. I know school is kicking my butt already, but staying positive. And we have a long weekend, which means a long weekend to catch up and plan ahead. So just to start off on the show, I would love to ask you, Rula, to kind of explain what Amplify Georgia is, and how you got involved in your role at Amplify Georgia.
Sure. Amplify Georgia Collaborative is a collaborative of reproductive health rights and justice organizations in Georgia. We are anchored by all organizations that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color led. That's how it was at the start of our formation 4 years ago. And it was really partner organizations that came together and said, we have a remarkable opportunity here in Atlanta, Georgia, because there are few other places in the country and in the Southeast that have this level of reproductive justice leadership and history that has already existed, and multiple organizations that have overlapping missions, shared visions for the future. And unlike in some other places where people may find that the only place they have as an organizational or organizing home may be like a large, predominantly white, historically white institution like Planned Parenthood or NARAL. We actually have Women Engaged, Access Reproductive Care Southeast, the Feminist Women's Health Center, Sister Song, a national organization headquartered in Atlanta, and many others. And so the combination of knowing we needed to have a space where these RJ organizations could put their heads together and have space where they were formulating the vision and leadership for abortion access and expansion specifically, and that wasn't like a domain that needed to be led or run by large organizations that are not as community connected, I'll say. That, and it was the end of 2016, start of 2017. I was actually working at one of the partner organizations at the time, and the thinking was, okay, we see that the federal landscape is going to be really tough for abortion access and reproductive health and rights in general, and probably anything to do with the needs of Black and Brown communities for the next 4 years at least. At the state level, our policy organizing has often been like having to react to bad things, fight real hard to make a bad thing a little less bad, basically preserve as much of the status quo as we could. But the status quo was not working, has not been working for our people. And so an area where we realized there was room to experiment and try to move progressive and proactive policies that could go farther than what the status quo was at the city level and the county level in our local governments. It's more accessible. Sometimes policy can happen on a more shortened timescale. And our cities in Georgia are more progressive than our state legislature, largely because of gerrymandering and the outsized influence of, well, y'all can speak more to this, but the outsized influence of like very embedded, entrenched whites and white supremacy and white upholding like rules of how the game is going to be is going to assort power to different districts. So we were like, let's try it. Let's figure out what cities are able to do. And one of the first things we found out, and it went on our butcher paper vision board, was, did you know that cities can fund abortions? Yes, they can. We were like, wait, so Atlanta is a city where the city officials say that they are in support of reproductive freedom, and they run a city that has a budget and they can allocate the budget according to their priorities. So Atlanta could fund abortions. This was 4 years ago, and we were like, sure, great. Atlanta can fund abortions. Well, we're going to be telling people about that. We're going to tell city council, tell the mayor, tell residents of ATL, but it does even to us feel like a dream. Fast forward 4 years of telling, talking, organizing, meetings, relationship building, and then this major crisis. We've had some local wins along the way, like establishing a city reproductive justice commission, getting them to pass resolutions that say the police are ordered to deprioritize investigating and arresting based on abortion law enforcement. Then, with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, they were like, I guess it's time to do the thing that we've always had in our power. But I don't think we would have gotten there if we hadn't been pushing them for 4 years, that you literally can do this, and we're trying to ask you to be accountable to that power. So as of 2 weeks ago, Atlanta, for the first time ever, and the first time of any city in the Southeast, has passed a resolution to donate $300,000 to our local abortion fund, Access Reproductive Care Southeast, that can be used for getting care in the city, in Georgia, or folks who need to travel across state lines because of this abortion ban that now has a time limit on folks. So that is, for me, something I'm just telling the story about a lot. Even though my work is in state campaigns, it's just like phenomenal to have seen going from a dream to something that is the first step of manifesting that vision. Like, we could get this funding every year. We could get this funding as a permanent line item. We could get more funding. We could get funding that includes childcare. Like, the fact that we did this shows that it is possible to do even more. And so that's one thing I am just making sure to tell everybody about in this story.
Oh, that's beautiful, because you're right. It sets a precedent of what can be done. Like, we have this amount of money that can be allocated for this. So we know you have the rest. Like, cough it up.
Yes.
We've seen it. So
yes.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I would love to ask you, and of course, I would love Michelle and Kai for you guys to touch on this as well. But how did you get involved in your work? And you could say for this particular role, but it also could be in just reproductive rights in general. Like, where did that passion come from?
How I got involved in my role in state campaigns with Amplify is pretty simple. I was working part-time with Amplify as a coordinator of like getting information about what was happening at the legislature and making sure it got shared with partners. And that was because at the time, Amplify was focused on city and county work. And after 2019, when so many organizations were trying to coordinate and organize with how do we respond to the state abortion ban, it was like, oh, we actually really need also information sharing on a more permanent basis. But would that be Amplify's role? We're not sure. It was after that year and after I started part-time working with them that we kind of built out a state program. So the state program is only 2 years old. But before that, I've been part of several of the member organizations. At the time Amplify was founded, I was part of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum Georgia chapter. I was an organizer with them for 3 years. That was transformative for me in terms of understanding how we build power in communities that are often overlooked or thought to be not very consequential, and making sure that when we understand the issues together and really are for each other, not just for a particular policy change, we can start to gain recognition and get a seat at the table. And we have to fight for a seat at these unequal tables just to make sure that we are not part of the folks going to be thrown under the bus because we weren't there. That's while we are trying to also transform things to be better. Before that, I was on the board of Access Reproductive Care Southeast, helped be part of their founding. I was so proud of that. We didn't have a BIPOC-led abortion fund here before. And early in my career, like first job out of college and also an internship during college, I worked at the Feminist Women's Health Center. And I didn't know that was going to be like my introduction to community organizing. And then in the end, when I worked in the clinic, it only took a matter of weeks for me to be like all in for abortion access, because although I had a lot of other passions in sexual and reproductive health, I just did not know until I was working in the clinic that although everybody has their own story, is like so unique when it comes to the circumstances of their life and what they're here for, whether it's just an abortion or they're also trying to get contraceptive care, or they're there for like a post-sexual assault, like trauma-sensitive exam. The law does not care about your individual circumstances. And the laws that exist in Georgia, the restrictions that people had to deal with even then, are so built on essentially a stereotype, what legislators think having an abortion is, that people who have an abortion are, and what they should do and what they should go through. And it does not meet people's lives. And so I was seeing all these barriers that people had to jump all these hoops over and over. And I was like, well, that's not right. And it feels like the people who are making the laws they're not doing it in service of the people who need access at all, I found out. So It started there. And it's been a long way till now to try and figure out how do we build the power we need to change things.
I love that. Thank you. And I would love to hear how you, Kayi, and Michelle also got into this work.
Growing up, it was always instilled in me that comprehensive public health, and access to it, readily accessible, and having it be readily accessible is a right, not a privilege. And so I would say my first experience in being like in that world of reproductive justice and human rights advocacy was when I was in college. When I was a sophomore, I trained to be a comprehensive sexual health educator, because that's something that I didn't have growing up. And so we, as a very young person myself, I was able to facilitate this curriculum for high school students in Harlem that weren't that much younger than me. And that was just very impactful for me to be in community with other young people like that, as a young person, and to know that exchange of like knowledge, being able to be trained in how to discuss topics that impacted all of our like day-to-day lives, but that adults much older than us were not necessarily, we didn't have those influences at the time, than folks like in our immediate communities that were willing to have those conversations with us in such an open and empowering way. Just really changed for me my confidence in my own voice and abilities to like just be and an active participant in the types of things that I wanted to see. And so from there, I was able to work with my Congress member for the district that I lived in Mississippi, Congressman Benny Thompson. I was able to work in his local office in Bolton, Mississippi on some anti-voter suppression work, which was really amazing to be able to do so young. And then I was also able to work with him immediately after graduating from college. I was able to work on his staff, where I first interacted with organizers and legal advocates, pushing for a comprehensive legislation on the federal level, the Each Woman Act, as well as other legislation on that level to push for reproductive justice. And just, I think that's when I realized that I wanted to also find opportunities to do things on the local level, more of a local level as well, because of the influence that those advocates had on me, and just in those really like meaningful interactions and conversations. And I always look back on that time like it had more of an influence on me than I think I was able to like necessarily like as an individual in that space like change much. But I mean, that may not be completely true, but it definitely had a large impact on me. And so ever since then, I've known that reproductive justice was where I wanted to serve as an advocate, as a human rights advocate. And I've, you know, made intentional choices at every turn, at every step to show up in this space.
Um, what was it? I will say like I formally didn't have like the language for reproductive justice until I started working at Women Engage in 2017. But prior to that, like since like late middle school into high school, I did like a lot of work around like sexual health, supporting people through sexual trauma, and just overall like sex education. Like at one point, I was like an aspiring sexologist, so like going to classes, studying the psychology, like all that stuff, which is like really fascinating. Like I'm, very much about like this ability for us to like talk about sexual health care, sexual liberation, all the ways in which we like hold ourselves and our bodies, like even when we start talking about like pleasure activism and things of that nature. So that's always been stuff that I've been relatively interested in, but didn't formally start getting into the work until I started at Women Engage, doing this like as a part of like my job. Before that, I was just doing like, so I was like I called myself like a freelance activist. Like I was just like, if it's a cause, I was down, whatever it was. Like if it was about advancing human rights, I was down for it. But I find that like using the reproductive justice frame has been really helpful to give me that language, because when I learned about it, I was like, oh yeah, I do this. Yeah, I believe in all that. Like, but didn't have the language for it. And then of course through the work with Women Engaged, and through like coalition and partnerships, continue to do work around like the civic engagement arena, and then started going into abortion rights and access, especially when HB 481 was first introduced in 2019 here in Georgia. And so those were like my first encounters really advocating on these issues in that way.
I love all of that. Thank you all so much. That's crazy. I literally just got a book about pleasure activism, literally like a week ago. And I've been trying to tell myself, just read one chapter before you go to bed. So I've been trying. Do I do it every night? No, but I'm getting there. But no, I love all of that. And I guess for me, it's basically the same. I've always thought about it, but didn't really understand the language of it until I started working with Women Engaged. Well, I guess interning was when I first started, and learning what reproductive justice is and what reproductive rights are. Because we all like, I was 18, 17 saying that abortion is healthcare, and I knew what it meant, but I didn't know like the detailed and the facts in this. I just know it's none of my business. And that was one of the things growing up. I was like, what you do in your house is your business. And that was kind of like where my activism for it started was, of course you can get one, because who am I to say what you can and cannot do with your body? So I love all of you guys' answers to that, and that's really awesome. That it seemed like everybody had a passion before they even knew they had a passion for it, for real. Like once they learned the language, like, oh yeah, this is what I like to do, and it was up from there. So I really love that. And I know, as a part of Amplify and the work that we all do together, in community with one another, one of the projects that we all are working on is the Reproductive Freedom Act. And I would love, Rula, if you were able to explain what that is. Yeah, just explain the parameters of it, the facts of it, and then we can go into the nitty gritty of what it means to present this bill. What is that?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. So the Reproductive Freedom Act is a bill. It is also a vehicle for a vision of people having access to abortion in a timely way, a way that gives them access to safe care, affordable care, care in their own communities with providers that they trust, as soon as they need and want abortion care. So all of that should also come without fear of punishment from the state, without fear of stigma or shame, and without fear of relationships being broken or exposed. So I'll try to unpack why I say all those things. But 2 years ago, when a broad group of reproductive health rights and justice partners laid out what would be the vision, the agenda, the change we want to see over the next 10 years, one of the things that many of our partners highlighted was that we have so many restrictions on abortion access already. This was 2 years ago. It was before HB 481, the personhood part of that ban, the 6-week part of that ban. We had different restrictions that were already in place. And so a lot of what came up then was that access to abortion care was already inequitable. And the rights that we had on paper through Roe versus Wade were already not being realized for us in practice. And that was all the more true if you were a Black or brown person, an immigrant, someone who lived outside of urban areas, someone who didn't make a lot of money or was on state insurance, such as Medicaid, or you're a state employee, or you're on Obamacare. All of those were ways that your access was being limited, even though supposedly we had the right to have an abortion. And that's not even getting into, which I will get into, the predicament that young people face when they need abortion care. So over time, we talked to stakeholders and organizations that included reproductive health rights and justice organizations that had been organizing or that had community member ties, as well as abortion clinics and providers, and people who worked with other folks who may be pregnant or need care, like survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence. And we tried to figure out what are all the different ways in which, one, it may be difficult to access care. There may be hurdles in getting care. And two, maybe there's people who haven't even had the chance to get to a clinic, or they never even felt like this care was an option for them. And then three, it's really important to make sure that when we make policy change, it also fits with our whole vision for how the world should be. So it was important to us as well to name that every person has the right to choose and carry out whether they will continue a pregnancy to term or whether they will have an abortion, and that every person also has the right to have or to not use contraception and sterilization, because this country has, and the South has, a long history of making those decisions in different ways for different people. And so people of color today often struggle with not being able to get the care they need for abortion care, but also struggle with having full rights and agency accorded to them when it comes to choosing to carry to term or to have the contraceptive of their choice, or to not use contraception. So, if I could put it in other terms, nobody should ever be coerced into a decision to have care that they don't want. And they also should not be kept from a decision by somebody else. So, the policy, the Reproductive Freedom Act policy, identified those barriers that we should prioritize knocking down. And those include the fact that Medicaid does not pay for abortions. It discriminates against people who have Medicaid in a way that other kinds of care, that just doesn't happen. it is, I mean, there's a whole history to that, which specifically came from an anti-abortion congressperson saying, I wish I could keep everybody from having an abortion, but Roe versus Wade says I can't. So what I can do is use the Medicaid bill to at least prevent poor women from having abortions. That was his words. Ever since then, there has been a disparity in who can actually access care. And we know from data from before Roe versus Wade that the people who were most likely to be injured or lose their lives because they were seeking abortions in ways that might not be safe were people who had already been denied by the white institutions that had a say in whether you get an exception to the law, or they could not even make it to those institutions. So having this law in place that says, it's not even a law, it's an amendment in the budget, the federal budget, that says federal Medicaid won't pay for abortion care. But states have the right to choose to use their own funds to pay for it, and Georgia does not. So that's a big, big barrier. It was named by almost everybody. Another one was the so-called Women's Right to Know Act instituted a bunch of supposedly small changes that added up to barriers. For example, 24 hours before you can have your abortion appointment, you have to listen to a set of, basically a script, a biased script that was written out in bullet points by the state legislature that clinic staff have to tell the patient, here are the risks of having an abortion. It does not mention that those risks are less than carrying to term or continuing your pregnancy. Here are, the same year that they were trying to cut back on childcare obligations for parents who were not co-parents, they also wrote into this law that you have to tell a patient seeking an abortion, well, if you continue your pregnancy, you could file for child support. Yes, and essentially like trying to give people a lot of reasons that were given by the state, not a patient, not a loved one, not a provider, of why maybe they should think twice. Then you got to wait 24 hours. Then you got to get an ultrasound. That ultrasound has to be documented in case the state wants to check up on your files. And you have to be given the opportunity to look at the ultrasound or listen to the ultrasound machine noise, which is all designed to create an atmosphere that is like, well, don't you want to think twice about this? When actually, when people come in and they have an abortion appointment, they have already gotten really clear on their decision over 97% of the time. The third thing that was just one thing, the Women's Right to Know Act, and then the other one was the Medicaid rule. The third thing was the law that minors have to involve their parents. They're required to notify a parent about having an abortion if they want to have an abortion. The one exception is that they could go to a judge and say, there's a reason I cannot. My parent has passed away. My parent is absent. I would be in severe danger if I told my parent. And the judge still has the right to say, no, sorry, you still got to tell them. And this is if you understand that you can go to a judge, find the courthouse, advocate for yourself. It is really a lot to ask. And so in practice, in reality, very few young people ever manage to have an abortion with judicial bypass granting them that agency. Instead, they may have to notify their parents despite not having a good or safe relationship with their parents. The truth is, young people who do have a good relationship with their parents do seek support from them. Young people almost always do seek support from a trusted adult, whether that is the person whose documentation is I'm their parent or not. And so having that requirement does not actually meet a lot of people's lives. And then the fourth thing was abortions do not have to be provided by a physician in order to be safely provided. A qualified and trained nurse practitioner, nurse midwife, or physician assistant can also provide an abortion safely and with great patient satisfaction. But in Georgia, we don't allow that because we have only, 5% of counties in Georgia have an abortion provider. Only 50% have an OBGYN or family physician. So that is a whole bunch of counties in Georgia, it's like over 80 counties that don't have abortion providers, don't even have a physician that would do this kind of care, but you do have nurse practitioners in those areas, you do have physician assistants. It would really open up access so much more equitably. So those are the major things we want to change, is roll back the restrictions that already exist that a lot of people think that's actually just part of how it has to be. It's not. And then we want to affirm that people have the right to have an abortion or not have an abortion, and that nobody's going to be criminalized for the outcomes of their pregnancy. If you have a miscarriage and then someone blames you because you were addicted to drugs at some point in your life or because you were in a car accident, that does not mean, number one, it's not sound science. Number two, it doesn't mean you should be going to jail. And so protecting people from criminalization is the other piece of that. I'm going to stop there.
No, that was wonderful. Oh my goodness. I don't even know where to even, that was so great. We have a lot of work to do, but that's all one, because it even opened my eyes on a lot of the stuff that I didn't even think about when it comes to just being very intersectional with the work that you do. Because even with the part where you spoke on, like, it is their right to even choose the contraceptive that they want to choose, to be able to have, that's the whole point of reproductive justice, is choice. And people don't really like understand that, like, the things that things that people can provide shouldn't be only in terms of this and only in cases of that, or you should be doing this. It's the choice to do it or to not do it. But it should always be up to the person that it's affecting. And I love that you brought that up. And I would love, Michelle, if you could touch on this as well, because I kind of came on definitely after. I've only been with Women Engaged for maybe almost 2 years now. So I would love to know how we got, um, how we partnered with Amplify, how we got involved with Amplify and the work that they do, and how we were involved with the Reproductive Freedom Act.
Yeah. So, speaking about like what Rula mentioned earlier, there was a reproductive justice, health rights and justice coalition. Wow. Okay, or like ecosystem that was in place. So we were a part of that ecosystem, and out of that was the conversation around the Reproductive Freedom Act. Rula was really leading the work in terms of like coordinating all of the partners across the state and like other allies around this issue. And that was like over the course of like, I want to say 2020. It seems like so long ago. Time moves very weird. And so
we had all our visioning in 2020 and like
right, like it was a lot going on. That's how I was like,
yeah.
And so we did like that, and then Amplify decided to take in the work and provided like an incubator and a space for it to continue to thrive and provide like some capacity on it. So that's kind of like how we got involved. So over the years, like a number of people from our team have worked to help flesh out things. We worked together to introduce the reproductive, like the resolution version of the bill, which was introduced in 2021 at the top of that legislative session. 22, sorry, y'all. I told you that time. It's weird.
I know this spring feels like it was a year ago. I know.
Right? Like I'm like, and also too, I don't know if it's just me, but since the pandemic, like 2021, 2022, like kind of like fused together in my mind. Cause I'll be like, oh yeah, that happened last summer. People be like, no, that's like 2 years ago. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah. So yeah, that was introduced in 2022. That's kind of like a primer of it. But that's kind of like how we've been involved, is just having those kind of conversations, continuing to like flesh out the language. It's been a really great time. Like we've had like sessions with like where we've invited legislators out to talk to community members. There've been game nights and other ways to like really get the public involved. And so it's been really great working alongside with Amplify and the other partners on this act, because it does take like a coalition of folks to bring it together, especially because of like a bill of this magnitude. Because I mean, for so long, we've just been on the defensive here in Georgia. And I think, even though, we were on the defensive, and then of course Roe v. Wade was overturned, but I found like the opportunity out of this is that it really does give us a space to be really progressive now. It's like, are we really on the, like how much more defensive are now that Roe is gone, right? Like now we have capacity and space to really like dare to dream of like, let's just put out these very bold ideas that we've had for so long, like what Rula mentioned around like the city funding abortion. Like let's like really just put it out there. Like, no, let's call you to task. Like, let's really do what it's got to do, because our folks need it, and this is just what it is, because you guys can do it. And so it's been great working together with folks, getting this together. And so I'm really excited for it to be introduced to the official act in the next legislative session in 2023.
And so Michelle mentioned like there have been a lot of team members across like partnering organizations that have, you know, contributed to this and planning this and in, you know, and, you know, at every stage. And so when I joined Women Engaged, um, about a year ago as a reproductive justice legal fellow, all of this work had been done with the RFA. And I just wanted to just add to all of the brilliant things you said, Rula, all of that great context you gave, Michelle, just that I was just so overwhelmed with like what this act is moving and it's seeking to accomplish, and it's um like Michelle just said, like this bold and audacious move by this coalition with this act, because as we've kind of been talking about over a couple of Yawas, is that this has been like a multi-decade kind of fight, and you know, as Rula mentioned, like there's been all of this chipping away and all of these very like kind of backdoor policies, as well as outright just like facially threatening policies to just suppress folks' reproductive freedom, um, ability to have bodily autonomy, and all these things. In many states, and just, you know, specifically in Georgia, there's been this like web of oppressive policies. In the RFA, literally kind of interacting with it the first time and reading the line items that are in this act, that the RFA is really doing this massive, just this is doing this incredible thing where it is like not is leaving kind of no stone unturned when it comes to all of the, again, like in your face, and then all of these kind of like subtly oppressive ways that people are having their rights threatened and taken away in Georgia, and the, you know, things that have passed and have been impacting our daily lives. And the RFA is kind of saying like, this doesn't have to be normal. Like we can live in the world that Rula described earlier, that was, you know, you painted this vivid, beautiful vision of people being able to just like thrive and just like be happy and be able to make the decisions they themselves, or they with their providers, or they with their communities have decided is best for them. And it's, you know, it's this multifaceted piece of legislation that is, it's doing all of those things. It's doing all of those things. And that is something, I guess I wanted to add, like from the perspective of someone that came in after a lot of those conversations were had, to go like, that's really incredible.
And just to add in, I know being able to join into these meetings and hear, and basically I just love to learn. So normally I don't do a lot of talking, but I just sit there and I'm like, wow, because I'm learning a lot. And one of the things that would always stick out to me was when we were looking through the bill and we were figuring out like language, and how to be very like intersectional when we talk about reproductive care and who it's for, because it's literally for everybody. But but when, of course, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, we were seeing a lot of, even though I'm not saying it's wrong, but we were seeing a lot of advocacy for cisgender women. And we weren't thinking about the grand, like, this is going to affect trans women, trans men, this is going to affect Black and brown people. Like, we weren't looking at all the, you know, the marginalized identities that this is going to affect and who it disproportionately affect the most. So I really appreciate that within the bill, and when discussing it and like coalition spaces and things like that, we were like, let's try to make this as intersectional as possible, because this is not going to just affect cisgender able-bodied people. It's going to affect a whole range of people that may not even be on people's like train of thought. So I really appreciated that portion of just the conversations we were able to have, and the conversation I was able to like listen in on. I feel like a fly on the wall, but in a good way, because I'm literally learning so much. But I just love that. And I want to ask before, because we had to end the show a little early today, because you know, one thing about organizing, it keeps going. I would love, before we get into that, before we get into self-care, I would love to just talk about like next steps regarding this act, and I guess in regarding all of our work in general. But particularly, Rula, I would love for you to speak on like what's the next step for the Reproductive Freedom Act at Amplify Georgia in the next like year or so.
Well, I know that a lot of people have on their minds that HB 481 was just allowed to go into effect, and that has radically changed abortion access for most people in Georgia. And the immediate sights are set on what can we do to repeal or mitigate HB 481. I'm here for that, and people want to know what is the bill. And I just want to be clear, this bill does that and more. What we didn't want was that this next session is going to be all about, well, we're going to get HB 481 to go away, and that will just make everything better and will be good, because that's not the case. So what we want to do is introduce the Reproductive Freedom Act. We are this fall already working to talk with legislators in the districts where supporters live. We are hitting the ground in communities to make sure that community members know this is something we've been working on with some of your neighbors. And do you want to tell us that you support this? If we have enough members in a district that support it, then we would then go to their legislative representatives and say, neighbors want to meet with you and talk to you about their concerns and see if you're going to support this too. So there's a lot of work to do between now and January. The hope is that come January, we'll have a lot of strong support from legislators for signing on to a vision of this size, even though we know it is not a one-year project. Signing on to a vision to say, yes, we support this, we are putting it on paper, get it introduced, hopefully get it assigned to a committee and have a committee hearing where we can have the arguments for this bill be on the record. But I think even just introducing it is a good first year goal with the kind of support and supporters and sponsors that we want behind it. So you will hear about it on the legislative forum, but we hope you're also going to hear about it in the community. If you're watching this right now and you're interested, you can get involved with Women Engaged. You can also sign up on our campaign sign-up form, where an organizer will reach out to you and say, what do you want to do? Do you want to host a discussion in your own community? Do you want to get a petition? We have a petition right now. I can share that link. But do you want to get your neighbors to sign it? Do you want to sit down with your legislator? So it's all a process of bringing community in to build and show the power that we would need. And this is really just step one. I kind of think of it like the Green New Deal. We're talking about building up a vision over many years that lots of people can get behind. And we may win pieces of it as we go, but that doesn't mean we stop because we got a bill.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess Michelle and Kai, if you want to answer the question as well, like considering I believe this is the last episode of the summer. So when we're thinking about like what we're looking forward towards, of course, reproductive healthcare, reproductive justice, what is something that you would also like to see in the next couple of months and the work that we are planning to do? Michelle, if you want to tackle that, or Kai. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really like agree with everything Rula just said. I think that it is a very ripe time like for those conversations. I think the RFA introducing the resolution earlier in this legislative session was so affirming. It is that anecdote you shared at the top of the call, Rula, about having those conversations. I think that was such an accomplishment that we were able to have meaningful conversations with legislators about this bill and have a resolution passed, which is, to get folks signed on to it. That means that, the conversations were meaningful enough for legislators, elected officials who represent a base that want this to show that, they're listening. And I'm just right there with you, Rula, just about the fall ahead of January session, continue to build on that momentum, which I'm enthusiastic about and confident in when it comes to the RFA and this group of people and this group of partners and, you know, the incredible like voters in Georgia who, again, have been doing this work for decades and, you know, have something like the RFA, you know, to also get behind.
Yeah, like I just think like I'm just excited to see us continuing to expand the conversation and really peeling back some of the nuances around abortion access and really supporting people and making the best decisions for themselves. Especially like when we talk about in light of after Roe and we start talking about these policies and things like that. I'm really, hopeful and keeping the pressure on people that like, we need to continue to do work outside of moments of crisis. Um, that we continue to organize around these things and that we also start to like talk about how interconnected these things are. So like I always ask myself, is somebody really empowered to fully exercise their bodily autonomy if the reason they're seeking abortion care is because they can't afford a child, even though they may want a child? Or, we started, talking about the reasons in which people are seeking care and making sure that we're just supporting people to really be their best selves. And that includes like all folks who are impacted by it. So that's what I'm really hopeful for in terms of the conversations is that we continue to expand it and continue to center the most marginalized because I think like especially thinking about like in the totality of the series over the summer and ending at this point is that there's a lot of great opportunities for folks to get involved. So I'm urging people who are listening now, go ahead, click those links, sign up, get informed, you start having the conversations. And let's continue to build that community power so that that way, like, once we get the RFA passed, then it's like, okay, let's talk about the next step. Like, let's start talking about a reproductive justice wage. Let's start talking about expanding healthcare access. Like, so then that way we can give more doctors in these counties, like, or, like get more like healthcare access in these counties and things like that. And so that's what I'm excited to see over the next couple of years is just laying out that plan.
Awesome. And before we get off, I want to know, we have a very long weekend. So how are people taking care of themselves this weekend? What is something that you just recently did that shows that you're taking the initiative to take care of yourself? I'll start off. I just bought myself a Dolly Parton shirt. I love Dolly Parton. She is like everything to me, and she came out with her own personal like cake baking mix kit, and I didn't get it because I do not like bananas, and it was like banana cake, and I was like, that's disgusting. So that's the only reason why I was like, Zoe, don't just get it because it's Dolly Parton, and I really wanted to because I love Dolly Parton, but I decided I'll just get merch from her website instead. So my Dolly Parton shirt's coming. So that's what I did to kind of like dating myself, got myself a cute gift, and trying to read more. Still in the process of doing that. I talked about that the last like 3 hours. I'm gonna get there though. I'm going to get there. And then anybody else who would like to touch on how they're taking care of themselves?
I have just planned time to spend with loved ones, family and friends. So it's great when it's like happens organically, but I find that it is harder for me to like plan in advance and like also plan like activities and fun things. So I have some just like get-togethers I'm really looking forward to spend time with the people that I love, and I'm excited.
Nice. I love bodies of water, and I always feel like summer in Atlanta is not complete if I do not go tubing on the Chattahoochee. So it has been thwarted a couple of times already this summer, and so I'm like, it's not really summer, it's just hot for no reason, don't know why. So it's got to happen this weekend. We're going to be watching the weather and getting out there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm taking a trip to Chicago over the weekend. So to go see friends and stuff. This is like the first time in a long time that I've taken like a trip to a city without like a purpose. Because usually it's like, oh, I'm coming for some event or I'm coming for whatever. And this time I'm just like, I'm here. Let's do things. And I'm trying to figure out, like, I feel you, Kai, about trying to plan out activities and stuff. I'm struggling, but I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. It sounds like all y'all have great plans. I know me, I'm asleep and read. So
and wear your shirt.
wear my Dolly Parton shirt and just hold my. I love Dolly Parton. So
I love learning that about you.
I know it's totally random when I tell people that. I love Dolly Parton. I love Chris Stapleton. I am a country music fan, and people be like, "What?"
Didn't know.
Grew up in Georgia.
Yeah.
In the country, so kind of had to. But yeah, so I want to thank you all for joining me today and just being in conversation in a community with me. I totally appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone who's listening now and who will be listening in the future. And thank you so much for continuing to support us here at Women Engaged and our partners. And yeah, so I hope you guys have a safe and wonderful weekend. Please take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Women Engaged.